Agrarian Reform Program, Philippine Constitution, and Taxation. Topic issue. The following are the topic issued by the national government through Commission on Higher Education (CHED) and Department of Education (DepEd) to be the graded lesson in social science. These are the Agrarian Reform Program, Philippine Constitution, and Taxation. Agrarian Reform Program. The agrarian reform aimed at modernizing the feudal structure of southern agriculture by expropriating the most unproductive portion of the large estates and redistributing them to landless peasants in the form of small holdings. Basically, agrarian reform are measures that aim at changing power relations by abolishing large landed property and feudal production systems. The rural population should be appeased and integrated into society, and this would contribute to the political stability of the country. During Corazon Aquino's presidency, launched the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law Republic Act No. 6650 on June 10, 1985. It became the centerpiece of the government with respect to agrarian reform. The Arroyo administration passed the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension and Reform, the Carper Republic Act No. 9700 on August 7, 2009. This did not supersede the Carl Republic Act No. 6651, but instead, it's intended to strengthen and improve the CARL. This means that agrarian reform progress farmers have owned a piece of agriculture land. The DAR is expected to proceed with its delivering of support services mandated in Republic Act No. 6657.
Philippine Constitution. Constitutions define constitution as a written instrument or document by which the fundamental powers of government are established, limited, and defined, and by which these powers are distributed among several departments for their safe and useful exercise for the benefit of the body of politic. The Constitution is based on important principles that help to ensure government with a popular sovereignty. The Constitution set those limits so that citizens know what their government is allowed to do and what is it not allowed to do. The Articles of Confederation were not working. Also, the purpose of constitutions is to limit the power of the government such that the rights of the citizens are protected from government abuse. The constitutional issues are centered in the following constitution: 1898 Malolos Constitution, 1973 Constitution, and 1987 Constitution.
A. Issue on the 1899 Malolos Constitution. The 1899 Malolos Constitution was the first democratic organic law ever made by the Filipinos. It was written by Felipe G. Calderon with the advice of Cayetano Arellano. Both are lawyers. The Constitution established a free and independent Republic of the Philippines. It created a popular representative government based on the three separate powers of the executive, legislative, and judicial power. But the most crucial and contentious issue pertained to the separation of church and state, which was by a mere one vote. A crucial point was the Filipinization of the Catholic Church, which the proponents of church unity championed and which their opponents sidestepped. In the end, the issue that Filipino elites could not resolve was settled by U.S. colonialism, which imposed church-state separation without Filipinization. Democratic meaning is the existence of freedom. With this issue, it begins the existence of the freedom of each individual to choose or vote accordingly to what they want to choose. And it was created based on three separate powers, which is the executive, one of the branches of government of which it enforces laws. Second, is the legislative, which has the ability to make laws, and third is the judicial power, which enacts any law that wants to be implemented. Here, the Philippines is given freedom in planning its laws in accordance with the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state is a legal political notion when each state and church institution are kept distinct in every element of resolving their institutions' issues without mediation or interference. Every citizen's religious liberty is measured using this notion. The concept behind this division is that the government should be impartial toward all religion and publicly acknowledge or favor anyone. Church refers to religion in general, whereas state refers to the government.
B. Issue on the 1935 Malolos Constitution. In the 1935 Philippine Constitution was drafted by the delegates of the Constitutional Convention, CONCON, who were elected in 1934. Claro M. Recto was elected president of the convention. The delegates crafted the 1935 Constitution. The Filipinos elected 202 delegates to the National Constitutional Convention in 1934. One of them was Senator Claro M. Recto, who became the convention president. The delegates drafted the 1935 Constitution, the country's first fully enacted system of laws, approved by the United States administration and used by the Commonwealth of the Philippines. Election of delegates to the 1934 Philippine Constitutional Convention was held on July 10, 1934 in accordance with the Tydings-McDuffie Act. The Tydings-McDuffie Act, officially the Philippine Independence Act, enacted March 24, 1934, is a United States federal law that established the process for the Philippines, then an American territory, to become an independent country after a 10-year transition period. The Tydings-McDuffie Act of the United States government detailed the steps required for the Philippines to become independent of the United States. A previous act, the Hair Hose Cutting Act, had been rejected by the Philippine Congress. The convention drafted the 1935 Constitution, which was the basic law of the Philippines under the American-sponsored Commonwealth of the Philippines and the post-war sovereign Third Republic. Recto is a noted lawyer, congressman, senator, nationalist statesman, and regarded as the father of the 1935 Constitution. Recto sponsored the Rizal Bill, providing for a compulsory reading in high schools and colleges of Dr. Jose Rizal's novels, which is No Limitanyari and El Filibusterismo, which was lobbied against by the Catholic hierarchy. The measure was passed by Congress and approved by the Malacanang on June 12, 1956 as Republic Act No. 1425, known as the Rizal Law. Salient features of the 1935 Constitution include the following: a bicameral legislature composed of the Senate and House Representatives. The President is to be elected to a 4-year term together with a Vice President without re-election. Rights of suffrage by male citizens of the Philippines who are 21 years of age or over and are able to read and write. Extension of the right of suffrage to women within 2 years after the adoption of the Constitution. Recto presided over the 1934 convention that produced the 1935 Constitution, which was in accordance with the Tydings-McDuffie law. The new Constitution provided for the separate and co-equal branches of the government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Recto, as President of the Convention, personally presented the Commonwealth Constitution to President Roosevelt for his approval and signature. The Constitution was amended in 1940 to have a bicameral Congress composed of a Senate and a House of Representatives, as well the creation of an independent electoral commission. The amendment also granted the President for a 4-year term with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms of office. Once they win on that election, they are not able to re-elect another election time. Second, and maaring pumoto para sa mga lalaki that are citizens of the Philippines is at the age of 21-year-old above at marunong magbasa at sumulat. And third is for the women, they need to have 2 years after the adoption of Constitution.
Letter C. Issue on the 1973 Philippine Constitution. While reformists called for the convening of the 1971 Constitutional Convention, the Marcos forces eventually hijacked it. As a consequence, 1973 Constitution was turned into a tool by the Marcos regime to perpetuate itself in power. Having declared martial law earlier, Marcos issued Presidential Decree number 86 calling for the cancellation of the plebiscite and instituted Barangay Citizens Assembly to ratify the new constitution by a referendum from 10 to 15 January 1973. This involved petitions assailing the proposed ratification upon the grounds, among others, that the presidential decree has no force and has law because the calling of such plebiscite, the setting of guidelines for the conduct of the same, the prescription of the ballots to be used and the question to be answered by the voters, and the appropriation of public funds for the purpose are by the Constitution lodged exclusively in Congress. Dito sa issue on the 1973 Philippine Constitution ay may mga reformista ang nanawagan para sa convening of the 1971 Constitutional Convention. Ang mga puwersang Marcos sa huli ay na-hijack ito bilang kinahinatnan. Ang 1973 Constitution ay ginawang kasangkapan ng rehimeng Marcos para mapanatili ang sarili sa kapangyarihan. Sa pagdeklara ng martial law earlier, inilabas ni Marcos ang Presidential Decree number 86 na panawagan para sa pagkansela ng plebisito at itinatag ang mga Barangay Citizens Assembly upang pagtibayin ang bagong konstitusyon sa pamamagitan ng isang referendum mula January 10 hanggang 15 ng 1973. Ang mga ito ay nasasangkot ng mga petisyon na tumutuligsa sa imungkahing ratifikasyon sa mga batayan, bukod sa iba pa na ang kautusan ng Pangulo ay walang puwersa at bilang batas dahil sa panawagan ng naturang plebisito. Ang pagtatakda ng mga patnubay para sa pagsasagawa ng pareho, ang reseta ng mga balota upang maging gamit at ang tanong na sasagutin ng mga botante at ang paglaan ng pampublikong pundo para sa layunin ay sa pamamagitan ng konstitusyon na eksklusibong inihain sa Kongreso. And there is no proper submission to the people, being no freedom of speech, praise and assembly, and there being no sufficient time to inform the people of the contents thereof. During its lifetime, several amendments to the 1973 Constitution were introduced. These were initially either initiated primarily to perpetual Marcos one-man rule as exemplified by the aforementioned amendments number 6 or introduced to construct some semblance of democracy to his unpopular regime by experimenting with various political systems like the French presidential system. The referenda and plebiscites that were conducted to ratify the amendments were ill-read, orchestrated, and made possible by his total control of government agencies like the bureaucracy, the military, and the Supreme Court. Dito ay walang tamang pagpapasakop sa mga tao dahil walang kalayaan sa pagsasalita, pamamahayag at pagpupulong at walang sapat na panahon para ipaalam sa mga tao ang nilalaman nito. During its lifetime, ang ilang mga amendments for the 1973 Constitution ay ipinakilala. These were sa una ay pinasimulan ng pangunahin ang walang hanggang pamamahalang iisang tao ni Marcos, gaya ng ipinakita ng nabanggit na amendments number 6 or introduced upang bumuo ng ilang pagkakahawig ng demokrasya sa kanyang unpopular na rehimen sa pamamagitan ng pag-eksperimento sa iba't ibang pampolitika tulad ng mga sistemang pampanguluhan ng Pransya. Ang mga referenda at mga plebisito na isinagawa upang pagtibayan ng mga amendments ay na-reach, orchestrated at ginawang possible sa pamamagitan ng kanyang kabuuang kontrol sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno tulad ng bureaukrasya, military at Korte Suprema. Letter D. Issue on the 1987 Philippine Constitution. The 1987 Constitution had some doubt, conflict, and controversies. This includes the death penalty, economic policies, land reform, form of government, and even the retention of American military bases in Clark and Sabic among others. Dito sa Philippine Constitution ng 1987 ay may mga pagdududa, mga tunggalian, at mga kontrobersya ang humahadlang sa mga Pilipino. Marami na ang nangyayaring sistema ng ating pamahalaan katulad ng kanilang pang-aagaw ng tribo, mga parusang kamatayan, mga patakaran sa ekonomiya, land reform, at mga anyo ng ating gobyerno at maging ang pananatili ng mga base militar ng Amerika sa Clark and Sabic. Other issue naman are the copyright infringement, drug war, martial law, at pakikipagsabwatan sa iba. Choice of the presidential system over a parliamentary system and a unitary system against a federal system. Dito ay pinipili nila ang isang pampanguluhan sa sistema ng parlamentaryo na kung saan dito sila magkakaroon ng maayos na sistema, walang mga controversial, mga separation at mga pahirap nito. At pinipili din nila ang isa pang sistema na nagkakaisa ang bawat membro laban sa sistemang federal. The three branches of government are separated and equal, but neither is true formally and in the operational code of actual exercise of power. Ang tulo ka branches ng government ay hiwalay at pantay, ngunit hindi rin ang tunay na formalidad nito at pati na din sa operational code na aktual na paggamit ng kapangyarihan nito. The president has almost have total control of the budget, which explains why legislator easily abandon their political parties to join the administration coalition. Ang Pangulo ay halos na ilaan nila ang pagkontrol sa budget sapagkat maraming mga Pilipino ang tumalikod sa kanilang partidong politika upang sumali sa koalisyon ng administrasyon. Ang koalisyon ng administrasyon ay dito ang pagkakaisa ng bawat membro sa administrasyon na kung saan ay may matatag na pagpapatupad ng kanilang mga tungkulin na maaring naka-impluwensya sa kanila. Katulad ngayong eleksyon, marami na ngayon ang mga taong sumasali sa administrative alliances sapagkat may mga bagay na lahat ng mga opisyalis ay ginagawa nila ang lahat para sa kapakanan ng bayan at pati na rin sa kanilang mga pangangailangan. Lingering legal shadows of martial law which give the president the power to declare martial law. Marami nang nangyayari sa martial law sapagkat may mga taong hindi sang-ayon sa kanilang mga batas. May mga taong pinarurusahan din ng kamatayan dahil sa umano'y pagsangguni o panlaban nila sa mga makapangyarihang batas at isa sa mga ito ang pinakamalaking epekto sa mga Pilipino. Dahil dito tayo magkakaroon ng epekto sa ating pangkabuhayan. Paano na kung mas mahigpit pa ang kanilang batas na halos hindi na matiis ng mga Pilipino, kaya ang iba naman ay nanlaban na lang para sa kanilang kapakanan. Several issues were the subject of heated discussion with the concern that drifted the law. Film director Lino Broca was among the member who walked out from the Concon. Broca was responsible in insulting the freedom of expression clause in Article 3, Section 4 as the word freedom. Maraming mga isyu ang naging paksa ng mainit na talakayin nito na may pag-aalala na nagpapanood sa batas. Ang pelikulang Lino Broca ay kabilang din sa mga membrong nag-walk out sa Concon. Si Broca ay responsable sa pag-insulto sa sugnay ng kalayaan sa pagpapahayag sa Article 3 and Section 4 bilang salitang kalayaan.
Taxation in the Philippines. First, let us define what is taxation. Taxation can be defined in a variety of ways. The following are some common definitions. It is the method by which the sovereign, through its legislative assembly, raises income to cover government expenses. It is a legal mechanism for the government to increase money for the goal of promoting the welfare and protection of its citizens. It is the collecting of a government's portion of individual and organizational income under legal authority. In general, taxes refers to governments levying mandatory levies on individuals or companies in practically every country of the world. Taxation is usually used to collect income for government expenses, but it can also be used for other purposes. Taxation started during the Spanish time in the Philippines. When Spaniards came, they started to collect tributos or tributes. The purpose of it is to generate funds or revenues used to defray expenses incurred by the government and promoting the general welfare of its citizenry, public expenditure, and to equitably contribute to the wealth of the nation. The Filipinos were compelled to pay tribute tax to pay for the administration of the country, construction of churches, government buildings, roads, bridges, and improvement of transportation and communication. So taxation during the Spanish period was compulsory. All Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay tax for two reasons. First, as a declaration of Spain's colonial sovereignty, and second, to cover the costs of pacification, forcibly suppressing opposition inside the colonies, and subsequent rule. So taxation was compulsory during the Spanish period. Taxes can assist the government in funding economic development projects. Originally, the tribute was 8 reals, 1 real equivalent to 12 centavos, but was raised to 10 in 1602, then increased to 12 in 1851. A little information. Reals are the name of the currency used by the Spaniards in their country and territory in the 14th century until it finally disappeared and was replaced by the end of the 18th century. History shows that the ancient Filipinos used reals during the Spanish period. It is said that the then King of Spain, King Pedro I of Castile, introduced reals as a currency. That is why reals can be seen back then with a mark called the Castilian mark. Those who were required to pay taxes were individuals from 16 years old to 60 years old, unmarried man over 20 years old, and an unmarried woman over 25 years old paid half of the imposed tribute. From 1521 to 1898, the arrival or invasion of the Spanish gave the Filipinos modern taxation concepts, with 16 to 60-year-olds being forced to pay tributes or tributos to the King of Spain through the colonial government, worth 8 reals or 1 peso per year, but there were also other forms of payments such as gold, chickens, textile, rice, and forced labor or pole servicio. Eventually, it is a forced taxation because taxes during the Spanish period was compulsory. The natives did not like the way the tribute was collected because the encomenderos became very wealthy and reaped huge profit from it. So it was the Philippine government during the Spanish colonial period. The encomienda system was implemented. It is a system from which the king has the right to transfer the authority of a particular land to any Spanish individual or institution. This individual who possessed the right of encomienda was called as the encomiendero. An encomiendero has authority to collect taxes from the people in his jurisdiction. He also has the duty to care and look for the benefits of the citizens. Unfortunately, the encomienda system was misused by some encomienderos. A lot of them use the encomienda for their own interest. They tend to abuse their power, collecting taxes more than the real tax value. The encomienderos abused their powers, which sometimes made people revolt against them. The encomienda system created hindrances for the economic development of the masses, this making the elite richer and making the economic situation of the majority underdeveloped. Although the encomienda system is designed for governance, its implementation gives negative effects to the people from which the encomenderos abuse their power against the people to whom they are bound to govern. Because of such abuse, the King of Spain abolished it in 1884. In its place, the cedular residence tax or community tax served as an income tax and personal identification of the inhabitants. So it was said that in 1884, the tribute was abolished and was replaced by the cedula, a certificate identifying the taxpayer that needs to be carried all the time, which allowed them to keep track of the people who could pay taxes. If someone is not able to present their cedula to a Guardia Civil, they will be imprisoned for being incomunicado, which means that they lack valid document or legal personal identification necessary to prove their identity. Cedula were first issued based on the royal decree on March 6, 1884. All men and women residents of the island, Spaniards, foreigners, and natives who were over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula. Another burden on the people was the bandala, the compulsory sale of farmers' farm products to the government, but in many cities the products were not paid for. Bandala system affected the lives of the ordinary Filipinos during the Spanish colonial period. a form of direct taxes that the Spaniards implemented, in which the natives were coerced to sell their products to the government at very low prices. Filipinos were forced to endure other unfair practices, such as forced labor, which was required for all Filipinos from age 16 to age 60. Because of forced labor imposed by the Spaniards and the abuses done by Spanish officials and friars is the main reason why the Filipino revolts against the Spaniards. In the Philippines today, these are the two kinds of taxes and local taxes. National taxes are imposed by the national government through the National Internal Revenue Code. Tariff and Customs Code local taxes are those collected by the local government units or LGUs based on local government code. Some of these local taxes are the real property tax and community tax. It was followed by the 1987 Philippine Constitution. The policy of taxation in the Philippines is governed chiefly by the Constitution of the Philippines and three Republic Acts. Constitution Article 6, Section 28 of the Constitution states that the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable, and that Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation, wherein the Philippines covers both national and local. National taxes are those that we pay to the government through the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Our national taxation is based on the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 or the Republic Act No. 8424, otherwise known as the Tax Reform Act of 1997 as amended. The import and export tariffs levied by the Bureau of Customs under Republic Act No. 1937, otherwise known as the Tariff and Customs Code of the Philippines as amended, can also be considered as national government taxes or duties. On the other hand, the local government taxation in the Philippines are based on Republic Act 7160 or otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991 as amended. These taxes, fees, or charges are imposed by the local government units such as provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays who have been given the power to levy such taxes by the code. Again, taxes imposed at the national level are collected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue or BIR, while those imposed at the local level, such as provincial, city, municipal, barangay, are collected by a local treasurer's office. The taxes imposed by the national government of the Philippines include but are not limited to income tax, state tax, donors tax, value-added tax, percentage tax, excise tax, and documentary stamp tax. While one of the main sources of revenues of the local government units is the real property tax, which is a tax imposed on all types of real properties, including lands, buildings, improvements, and machinery. In addition, business owners, professionals, employees, consumers, and every taxpayer should be aware of the different kinds of taxes in the Philippines. Lately, the current president of the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte, implemented the Train Law or Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion, which was signed last January 1, 2018, which seeks to correct a number of deficiencies in the tax system to make it simpler, fairer, and more efficient, wherein the rich will have a bigger contribution and the poor will benefit more from the government's program and services. Taxes are paid for the use of public services, construction of infrastructural projects, for the salaries of the government employees, for operating expenses, and others. In other words, the primary purpose of taxation on the part of the government is to provide funds or property for the promotion of the general welfare and protection of its residents, as well as to allow the government to fund its various activities or allow to spend money on essential services. So, if we were asked where does Philippine tax money go, obviously to the government because the government spent more than the taxes that every Filipino pays. Furthermore, it is illegal to deliberately refuse to pay one's income taxes. Such conduct will give rise to the criminal offense known as tax evasion. Tax evasion is defined as an action wherein an individual uses illegal means to intentionally defraud or avoid paying income taxes to the IRS. It involves hiding or false income without proof of inflating deductions, not reporting cash transaction, etc. Tax evasion is a serious offense, comes under criminal charges and substantial penalties. And also, we need to pay taxes in the Philippines because the Philippine government relies heavily on tax revenue to fund its operations and finance its development projects. So taxation is a critical part of the country's economic and fiscal policy. Aside from the revenue the taxes generate, they also help promote economic stability and growth.